Good morning to you, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Again, I will ask you to like, share, and or comment on the post. And then if you want to follow along, I'm going to be looking at Ruth chapter 1, verse number 6. Verse 6 says, Then she, speaking of Naomi, arose with her daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, to return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So here we have a decision of Naomi. She's going to return home. She wants to go back to the promised land. Don't know how, but somehow or another, while out gleaning in the fields of Moab, she discovers, she hears that God had blessed his people, that God had visited his people, as it says. In other words, they were beginning to, they had food, is what it amounts to. And so she got excited about this prospect. She really had no future here in Moab. She was a widow, a foreign widow living in a foreign land in a male-dominated world, and so she was always going to be at the bottom of the economic and social ladder. She would probably always be, for food, have to be gleaning fields, taking what was left over. She just really, in Moab, there was no hope for Naomi, other than just a very pathetic, poor, bottom rung existence. And in that situation, she hears that God has visited the land of Israel, and finally a hope. Finally, she sees some light at the end of the tunnel, and she makes a decision that she is going to go back home. Now, that sounds great, but let's think about it for a minute. What motivated Naomi to go home? It was her stomach. It was a food decision. The famine has ended in Israel. There's food in Israel. So she's looking for she's still chasing the same thing that brought her to Moab in the first place. The same thing that led her to leave Israel and go to to a foreign land with foreigners and foreign gods and false worshippers. The land of Moab, the same thing that led her there was now going to get her to go back to Israel. Food. What's going to happen the next time there's a problem with food in Israel? Is she going to pack up and move again? And again, now let's not. I don't want to mislead. It was a good decision to go back to the promised land. Should have never left it to begin with. It was a good decision to go back to Israel, to go back to the promised land. But we don't read anywhere here where she ever admits, I made a mistake leaving Israel. Literally, you could go so far, not just say, let's not just say, I sinned leaving Israel and going and living in this foreign land among these false worshipers. It was a sin to do that. And I'm not repenting. I'm not forgiving. I'm going back to where the food is. As the great scholar Warren Wiersbe writes, he said her decision was right, but her motivation was wrong. She wasn't going back to Israel because that was the land of her people, the land that the promised land that God had given them. She was going back looking for a meal. She wasn't going back because she had moved to Moab and felt far from God, because felt like she was out of the will of God and she needed to go home and make things right with God, go home and get back, to serving God, going back to the temple and worshiping. She was going back because she was broke. She was a widow. She was hungry. She was tired of having to glean and pick up the leftovers out of the field. she drug back home to Israel. Let's think about it this way. Suppose Naomi's husband had never died. Suppose her sons had never died. Would she have ever went home to Israel? Would she ever went back? I've got to say probably not. She only went back when there was really nothing to be lost or gained. It wasn't about her relationship with God. What she needed here more than a plate of food was a restored relationship with God. The fact that she had, her family, her and her husband had failed to trust God to begin with and had left the promised land, moved to Moab, moved among unbelievers, the false worshipers. We don't know how caught up in the false worship she got. But instead of trusting God, she had packed up and moved to Moab. She's not moving back to Israel because she trusts God. She's moving back to Israel, again, not because she trusts God to take care of her once she gets there. She's going back because she heard there's good things already happening in Israel. And again, she never, at least we never read here that she confesses her sin of distrust, of unbelief, of any of those things, but she simply was following her stomach. Keep that in mind. You make the right decision for the wrong reason. We talked about a few weeks ago now, delayed obedience with Jonah after God's word comes to him the second time he goes to Nineveh. Here we see a case of misguided obedience. How's that? Again, that she only goes back to feed her stomach. She doesn't go back because she wants to be near God, because of her relationship with God, but because of there is now food in Israel. Brings us to the question of the day: why do we serve God? Why do you serve Him? Why will you go to church this Sunday? Why will you pray? Why do you read the Bible? Why do we do? What is our motivation for what we do? That's a question that only you can answer. But you can be doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. Think about it. How many people have started going to a church because somebody worked there and they thought maybe they could get in with that person and get a job? Those kind of things. How many people have started, how many young men will be at church this weekend, not because they want to hear the gospel, not because they want to serve God, because there's a pretty girl at that church. And maybe not even just young men. But think about it. You can do the right thing for the wrong reason. Let's do the right thing for the right reason. Think about it. Have a great day. We'll see you here tomorrow morning.